thank you guys, and if you have questions, just kind of wrestle the mic out from Mr. Kirby's hands there, and he looks like that'd be easy to do. Maybe not, but but if you have questions, stop me and let's we don't have to try to get through everything in one shot, But how many of you guys, just so I get an idea, how many of you guys have handed out gospel tracts before? Raise your hands. Okay. How many of you guys have ever had a conversation, one-on-one conversation, with somebody about the gospel? Okay. Any of you get scared or fearful in handing out a gospel tract or having a one-on-one conversation? Yeah, I do too. What I want to try and teach you guys is a couple of things, just easy ways to kind of overcome that fear. And then if we have time, we'll get into the actual message of how to present the gospel. But for most people, if you're anything like me, it's actually kind of harder to get over the fear, overcome of the fear of, Now I've been evangelizing for as long as I've been a Christian, which is now over 30 years. And my first attempt of evangelizing probably wasn't the best. You guys ever see those little comic book tracts? Actually, I have one here. You ever see those tracts like this, little chick tracts? I used to stuff them in my friends' lockers at school, and then I'd go to their homes and stick them like in their bedrooms, and then deny when hey, are you sticking these tracts, those gospel, or actually they didn't say gospel, they said those cartoons. I'm like, no, not me. That was my big attempt of evangelizing early on. But over the years, I learned how to overcome the fear in that, in how to start conversations. Now, after 30 years, I'll still tell you that the first person you evangelize is always going to be the scariest. The first person you evangelize that day, I should say. I try to make it a practice to evangelize once a day. I happen to go to like Wawa, or if you have those out there, but like a stores that sell coffee, and by going there's always someone there I can at least hand a gospel tract out to. So I kind of try to make it a pattern, to try to see if I can do that once a day and actually start one conversation at least once a week, which means I'm not always having it as a goal to evangelize everyone I meet, but I try. But the first person is usually the hardest. Okay, and the reason it's the hardest is because we all have this fear. So what I want you guys to do is I'm going to ask you guys to just shout out some reasons that you're afraid of, why you'd be afraid to share the gospel. So someone give me some reasons.
Rejection.
Rejection.
Okay, rejection of what? That you would be rejected?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's good. Any others?
Of them like asking questions that you don't know how to answer.
Yeah. Too.
Yep. All right, good. Any others?
It's their reaction.
You think they're going to beat you up, maybe?
You never know.
I got that one.
I've only been hit twice. Once from my mother and once from my father. My mother was 18 and my father when I was 46.
Like say you're ministering to somebody that you know, like losing like popularity and stuff.
That's like a big thing in high school? No. And these are there's no new reasons. I have those same fears. Okay? And I travel the country, I speak to people all the time, and it's the same list of fears, and those are the things I want to help you to overcome. If you're afraid of being rejected, one good reason to go out to the parks and evangelize? You're evangelizing people you don't know and will probably never meet again. So if they reject you, it's really not a big deal, right? But your friends in school, like you said, that popularity, that could become a big issue. I mean, in my neighborhood, none of my neighbors talk to me anymore. One Christmas, I gave them all basically a gospel tract, a CD that we produced that has the gospel on it, and a book that contains the gospel. And it was funny, after that, none of my neighbors wanted to talk to me anymore. And that's a risk that we can run. But it could be a risk that's worth it, too. And one of the things that's going to help us overcome our fear is going to be when our concern for where they spend eternity becomes more important than our concern for them liking us. And that's a real struggle. Because some of us want to be, well, okay, all of us want to be liked. Right? Especially in high school. So I'm going to give you 3 principles that we teach when what we call ambassador evangelism. And the first 2 have nothing to do with the gospel, but they're stuff that you can practice at home with your parents, at school, anywhere you go, and you'll see how it becomes an effective way of kind of, working through a conversation, especially one where you're kind of nervous. All right? So the first principle, because we have to realize that when we're sharing the gospel with people, you have two people involved in a conversation, and both of them can get defensive. Right? Have you guys ever been in an argument with somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah? When you're in an argument with someone, are you listening to see if they make a really good point that you can learn from? Or are you listening to see how you can kind of slam their argument and shut them up? Which one?
Second one.
Second one. Exactly. Do you know one reason we don't want to share the gospel? We don't want to be in that second conversation, and the gospel's offensive, right? People get upset over it. So the first principle is to try to prevent that. And the first principle is to disarm their defenses. Okay, now how do we disarm their defenses? 2 ways. One is the use of humor, and second is being polite. Okay? If it's someone you don't know, getting their name becomes a way of showing respect when you use someone's name. If you don't know their name, you can call them sir or ma'am, things like that. If they give you a funny name for a name, like I just had this week where I was talking to someone, and he says, "I don't have to give you my name." I said, "Well, that's kind of a funny name, but if that's what your mom named you, okay. So I don't have to give you my name. Let me ask you a question. I don't have to give you my name." And I kept referring to him as, "I don't have to give you my name," which just kind of made everyone listening kind of laugh, because it showed that I wasn't being rude, but there was a humor aspect to that. Now, by being polite, what that does is it helps people to, if people like your demeanor, the way you behave, they're less likely to want to yell at you and get upset and throw things at you, right? But if you act like a jerk, one of the things about that is if I act really dumb or really mean, then someone can reject the message, and their pride will say, "Hey, because of the way you're behaving, you're prideful, you're a jerk," and they can just tune me out. And it's really my behavior that shut the conversation down. Do you see? You understand how that works? So here's the thing. The reason I learned to be polite was I used to go to the courthouse every Friday morning. Courthouse, they have them all over the country. The nice thing about a courthouse is that they bring in several new jurors for me to hand gospel tracts to every week. It's really nice of them. And I would just sit there with my courthouse. We'd have 300. I'd come with a stack of 300 tracts, and every Friday morning I would hand them out, and I can get through 300 tracts in about an hour or 2. And so they would all take them. If they took them or not, I'd say this to them. If they rejected it, I would just say, "Have a nice day." Now, being at the courthouse, we had friends of mine who were there for like a year and a half before I was there, and they would go each week. And so they kind of knew the people that work in the courthouse knew who wouldn't take a gospel tract. A couple people took my tracts that they didn't take their tracts after a year and a half, and they were like, "What did you say to that person?" I had 3 people that this happened with, and I said, "Have a nice weekend. It's supposed to be nice. Like, I hope you have nice plans." That's all I said. And a person turned around and said, "You know what, maybe I will take one of your tracts." Or pieces of paper is what they said. what the difference was that my friends who were there were just saying, "Hey, did you get one of these? Did you get one of these? Did you get one of these?" And I'm saying, "Hey, have a good day. I hope you have a good weekend. It's supposed to be nice out. You know, hope you have nice plans." It was just going that extra little bit of being polite. Made a difference. But I like to use humor. Okay? I'm not saying to be a comedian or to make a joke of the gospel. But if you're in a conversation that you enjoy, then you're not looking to get argumentative. Because of my use of humor, I usually get guys that profess to be atheists that actually will come up to me after I open air preach. Any of you guys ever see open air preaching before? You know what that is? Or open air evangelism? It's where someone will maybe stand on like a box or on a corner and just share the gospel openly, and sometimes the crowd will gather. I've had guys that profess to be atheists come up and tell me that they really respect why I do what I do, even though they disagree with the message, because the way I conduct myself, because I'm making it an enjoyable thing for them, at least apart from the uncomfortableness of the gospel message itself, which we'll get to. So the use of humor actually becomes really good because it lightens the conversation. It makes it where someone's less argumentative. Okay? And there's little things that you could do to use humor. All right? I had once where and I'm known for doing really dumb things, just in case you if you don't figure this out. But I walked into I was in a Sears, and I actually walked out of Sears without paying for the thing that was in my hand. It was vacuum cleaner bags, because I was waiting for like 45 minutes to ask a guy a question about a dehumidifier, and by the time he finally got around to answering, to being free to answer my question, I actually walked out of the store without paying, because I just the vacuum bags were just in my hand so long, I guess I forgot. But before I left, what I did was I walked past the jewelry counter. I saw a guy at the jewelry counter behind the counter, and I handed him a gospel tract. And I'm trying to see if I have let me see if I have $1 million bill. Yeah, here. This is one of my gospel tracts. This one's $1 million bill with Reagan on it. All right. So it has a gospel message on the back. The one I gave this guy was a $0 bill. It actually just said 0. So as I walked past, I gave it to him. I slipped this over to him. I said, "Hey, dude, put this in your wallet. If your friends ever ask you to have money, you can honestly say I have $0 in my wallet." And I walked out of the store. And so it left the conversation where he kind of got a chuckle out of that. But then I realized as I opened the trunk of my car, I go to put my vacuum cleaner bags I didn't pay for into the trunk. And guess what I realized? I didn't pay for them. Now, I'm not going to ask what you guys would do in that circumstance. I'm sure that you'd go back in the store and pay for it. That's actually what I did. So I start walking in the store, but I walk in the store and I had a dilemma. Now, I don't know if you guys ever get embarrassed. I had a dilemma. I could go back to like the jewelry counter and see if I could pay for the bags at the jewelry counter with the guy I just handed a gospel tract to, or I could go to like the lady that was standing over there that doesn't know me at all. And I figured I'd go back to the guy that I just handed the tract to. We had a great conversation, but it started off over something humorous. He enjoyed that. I've had where people will say things that I will try to use to kind of just lighten the conversation. All right? Now, that doesn't work if mom and dad are upset because, you just were playing ball in the house and broke the, brand new lamp or something. Usually humor doesn't work well then. I'm just saying. But, in a case where you're sharing the gospel, what you don't want to do is you don't want it to be where you're both banging heads with each other. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. I'm seeing some head nods, so I'll take that as a yes. So I want to try to cover as much as we can. But if it's not in enough detail, let me know. But the thing is when we get to how how to present the gospel. I'm going to show you how the use of humor comes in. The second thing, and this is going to be important to, one of you guys said that you're afraid someone's going to ask you a question you don't know the answer to. The second principle will help you with that. The second principle is to disarm our own defenses by learning to ask good questions. And this is one of the most powerful things. If you guys learn this, you will never be afraid of sharing the gospel. Now that sounds like a tall order, but it's actually true. If somebody else makes a claim, just remember to ask them a question. If you can remember that, you're not going to feel that defensiveness at all. Because the reality is, every one of you there has a perfectly good answer to any question asked. And I'm going to prove it to you. I want each of you to answer me this question. How many grains of sand are there on all the beaches of Honolulu? What would be your answer?
To me, you count.
Yeah.
You don't know, do you?
100 trillion.
Do you know that for sure?
100 trillion and one.
The honest answer would be that we don't know, right?
Yeah.
And there you go. That's the honest answer. If someone asks you a question you don't know the answer to, you could say, gee, I don't know. Then what you do is you say, hey, give me your email. I'll look up the answer, see if I can find an answer for you and get back to you. And you'll usually find out that they're really not interested in the answer. They just want to trip you up. All right? Sometimes they don't ask it so much as a question, but an accusation. Give you for instance. I was in New York once, New York City, and I had a guy who was trying to shout. I had a crowd of people, and he's shouting, "There is no God because there's evil in the world. There is no God because there's evil in the world." And I stopped the crowd. I said, "Everyone, shh! Everyone, shh! Sir, tell me, how could there be God without evil, or how could there be evil without God?" Sorry. Now, if you notice, what I did is he made a claim. He said there is no God because there's evil in the world. What he wants me to do is he wants me to explain evil. Right?
Yeah.
But do I have to do that? No. He made the claim. He has to answer for it, not me. So I asked him a question. So if you remember that, you're not going to have to worry about that fear. They make the claim. They have the burden of proof to support that claim. So all I do is start asking questions. And I ask a lot of questions. So with this gentleman, I asked him, I said, how could there be evil without God? You see, now, he never thought about that. Have any of you guys ever thought about that, how there could be evil without God? See, that's actually, that's one of the questions, you know, Richard Dawkins and some of the professing atheists bring up a lot. How could a good and loving God who can do anything allow evil? That's a question they often ask. You know what the problem is? Their argument requires God. Here's why. As with this gentleman, his name is Jason. I've gotten to know Jason really well over the last 7 years. But Jason basically made this argument. And I said, how could there be evil without God? And he goes, well, you tell me what evil is. I said, I didn't say evil exists. Notice what he was trying to do. Where's he trying to put the burden?
On you.
On me. Do I have to take that burden? No. And that's where we get defensive. We start getting nervous, like we have to answer for evil. And I said, sir, I didn't say evil exists. You did. Please define evil and explain to me how you can have evil without God. And he's like, no, you tell me what evil is. I said, well, evil is the absence of good, and good is defined by God. So I don't know. How do you get evil without God? And the guy threw up his hands and walked out of the crowd, and the whole crowd laughed. You see, when they ask about evil, they can't explain evil in their worldview. if they profess to be atheists like this gentleman, right? He wants to get me defensive. There's a reason people want to get you defensive. If you're defensive, it seems like they have all the answers and they just keep pestering you with questions or statements until you say, I don't know, and then they can feel like they have all the answers. But if they ask a question, if they make a statement, you can ask a question. Even if they ask you a question, can you prove that God exists? I have a question when they ask me that question. What kind of evidence would you be looking for? Now I'm just flipped it on them. Now I'm asking a question. This is exactly what you see Jesus do very often. When you read through the Gospels, you'll often see Jesus respond to people with a question. Think of the woman at the well. They're talking about water. He ends up asking her a question, but those questions are leading questions. You can actually control the conversation through questions. I actually did this on an interview once. I asked myself questions in an interview where they're supposed to be asking me questions, and I can control the conversation by asking myself questions, but I asked questions that were questions they thought of in their own mind. The use of questions allows you to control a conversation, and it keeps you from being in the hot seat. You guys see that? How that could be? So if you're in a situation where, say, you're talking to someone at school and you're sharing the gospel with them, and they start challenging you. Maybe they're from a different religious background. Maybe, say, they're a Muslim or Roman Catholic or something like that. And they say to you, "Are you telling me that all other religions are false and only yours are true?" You guys ever hear that before?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I would ask them, does your religion teach the same thing? Because doesn't it? Don't all their religions say they're the only one?
Yeah.
So what they're trying to do is put you in a position that they themselves are in, but what they want to do is not answer. And that's why people go on the attack. When you're in attack mode, you don't have to answer. And so the person you're talking to, they want to get you into defense mode so that they can not have to answer for their worldview. The advantage of asking questions is you can actually play dumb. Now, I happen to be good at that, playing dumb. I have years of experience at it. But what it is that you could say, hey, look, I'm just asking questions here. I'm looking for you to educate me, to teach me, to help me understand what you're saying. So I'll give you a scenario where this happened. I was at a Montclair State University here in New Jersey, and I was talking to a gentleman, and he told me that the Bible was edited by the Roman Catholic Church in the 1500s. Now, have any of you guys ever heard that the idea that the Bible was created by the Catholic Church and edited? Any of you ever hear that before?
No.
Okay. So usually they say it was edited in the 300s at the Council of Nicaea, but in this case, this guy said the 1500s. Okay. Now, this is actually something where I have a background. It's called textual criticism, and I actually have a background in it, but I didn't let that be known. So what I did is I started asking him a ton of questions. I asked him, how did they go about doing that? Because I want to understand what his thinking is. Now, when you're doing that, one thing that does is that also shows respect. This is also the reason I think I've never been in trouble with police. I have a lot of friends that have been arrested and told they have to move away because they're not allowed to share the gospel in certain areas because police don't always understand First Amendment rights. And I've never had trouble, and I think the reason is because this is what I do. I ask questions. I'd ask a police officer a question. So, with this gentleman, I asked him, how exactly do they go about doing that? How do they edit it? I mean, I have a Bible right here, I said, how did they go about editing this Bible? He says, oh, they collected all the copies. They collected all the copies? He's like, yeah. I'm like everywhere around the world? He's like, oh, yeah. I said, okay, so then what did they do with the copies? He said they made changes to it, and they put the new versions in the place. I said, everywhere in the world? He said, yeah. I said, all right. Now what I did is I made a shift. I asked him about the school newspaper, which happened to be like, because in college they have school newspapers. I said, this is a school newspaper. Let me try what you just said with the school newspaper. I said, when did the school paper come out? And it actually had just come out that day, and he actually worked as a photographer for the school newspaper. So he said it came out at 11 o'clock today. I said, okay, it's now like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I said, where are the papers? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, I mean, we got some here in this stack, but where are they? I mean, students have taken them. Where'd they put them? He's like, well, I'm going to have some in their backpacks. Where else? Well, you're going to have some in the student center. Where else? He's like, in their dorm rooms. Where else? He's like, the garbage can. I said, where else? He's like, people's cars. Where else? He's like, their apartments. I said, okay, if I wanted to change the school paper that just came out a few hours ago, where would I have to go? And he's like, well, you'd have to go to everyone's apartment and everyone's car and the trash, because I could pull it out of the trash even, right? You'd have to find all those and replace them. I said, could I do that with the school paper? He's like, no, you'd never be able to get them all. I mean, there'd be like an original somewhere. I said, really? But that's what you thought that happened with the Bible 1,500 years after it was written, across all the continents. I mean, like all over Asia and Europe and Africa. How do you do that? He goes, this isn't making much sense to me. And I was like, it wasn't making sense to me either, but you know, you were the one believing it. I'm just trying to understand it here. And he kind of laughed and realized that this whole thing of why he was rejecting the Bible, by a series of questions, he realized it made no sense. I have things that people will ask me all the time. They'll say, you know, when I quote the Bible in public, they'll say, the Bible is written by men. Have you guys ever heard that argument?
Yeah.
Yes.
What are they assuming when they say it? If I say the Bible's written from men, what are they really trying to imply? I heard someone in the back.
Did you say for or by?
Huh?
Did you say for or by? Like written for men or by men?
By
But when they say it's written by men, what is it? What's the argument that they're trying to make?
That men are sinners
Yeah.
and they're not perfect?
Correct. And therefore, what can we trust the Bible or not?
Not trusted?
That's right. That's what they're trying to say. Now, all of us would know the Bible isn't written just by men, right? It's written by God.
Yeah.
But that's not what their issue is. They want you to try to argue for how men can write God's word. And truthfully, none of us can completely understand that, and they kind of know that. That's why they want you to get where you're trying to explain something you can't comprehend. So here's the thing. I asked them a series of questions. I'll ask them, are you saying that the Bible's not trustworthy because it's written by men? Because that's the real issue, right? And they say yes. Now I end up asking a question like 3 or 4 different ways. I'll say, do you trust things written by men? And they're going to say no. And I'll ask it like a couple different ways. I'll be like, so you're telling me you wouldn't, if a man writes something, it can't be trusted? They'll be like, that's right. And I ask that a couple times because I want them to commit to that. And then what I'll do is I'll ask them, do you believe in Darwinian evolution? And they always seem to say yes. So what I do is I reach into my preaching bag and I pull out a copy of Darwin's Theory of Evolution. And I look at it, because I actually carry it around just for this purpose. And I look at it and I say, that's funny. It's written by a man. I hold it up and I show the title. And I say, I thought you said you don't believe anything. You don't trust anything written by a man, but you said you trust Darwinian evolution. And it's written by a man. And all of a sudden they're like, well, no, but we trust that because it's written by trustworthy men.
Okay.
What did I do? I just showed them that they don't believe their own argument, right? And I did it by questions, and I'm having fun with those questions. You notice how I'm doing it using humor, but I'm just asking questions. And I can even say that. Hey, I'm just asking questions here. You're the one that said you don't trust in anything written by men, but you trust in evolution, which was written by a man. How do you reconcile those? I don't understand that. Really, the issue is the issue of trust. And I'll ask them, have you ever read the Bible? Which almost always they say no. Which really is fun, because then I can go, that's not very scientific of you to make a conclusion based on no evidence. Is that the way you build the rest of your worldview? Now notice I'm not the one in any. Notice I'm not in the hot seat, guys. I'm not feeling any of the pressure this way. Who's got all the pressure on them?
They do.
They do. Because they're the ones making the claim. I just ask the questions. But I can lead a conversation in questions. All right? So the first principle is to keep them from getting defensive by being polite and using humor. Second principle is to disarm our own defenses by asking good questions. All right? And I want to allow a lot of time at the ends for you guys to ask questions. The third principle is this. Have you ever heard Christians being called judgmental? Raise your hands. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to tell you how to avoid being told that you're judgmental. All right? I say to avoid being called judgmental by using God's law to explain what a sinner is. If I walk up to one of you guys and I said, you're a sinner, did I make a judgment call? Is that a judgment?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's okay if it's true, if it's a right judgment. Every one of us judges, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I do when I get told that I'm judgmental, I do something when if I'm preaching in the open air, I'll say things because for the use of humor and to get people thinking. I say I'll be like, well, yes, I'm judgmental. I'm married, and then I just go quiet for a little bit, and everyone's like, what? What does married have to do? Well, I judged a lot of women that weren't appropriate for me to marry, and one that was right. You see, every one of us judges all the time. We just don't think about it because we do it all the time. But there is a way to lead through a conversation without judging the person, but letting them judge themselves. What you do by using God's law, the Ten Commandments, what you're doing is, as you know, Paul said, is you're letting the law be a teacher. Okay? It's kind of like putting the law is a mirror, and as you look at it, it reflects your true nature. And so what you want to do is you want to put that law up for them and let them see what they really look like. And you can do that with a series of questions. So I'm going to give you the questions that I end up asking, and the questions I ask is kind of modified from something that a guy, Ray Comfort, out in California has come up with. He's with a ministry called Living Waters. Has a TV show called Way of the Master. And I've used it because of this reason. Being from a Jewish background, I would talk to other Jewish people, or other people actually in general, and I knew that I was raised, and if you don't have Jewish friends, you may not realize this, but I was raised to believe that Jesus Christ is Hitler's God, okay, because Hitler was supported by the Roman Catholic Church. And so if you don't have any Jewish friends, you may not realize that to a Jewish person, the name of Jesus Christ is like, it's kind of worse than the N-word to someone who's black, okay? Although I don't quite understand that, because black people seem to use that about themselves all the time by me in New York. It's just if I was to use it, I'd be in big trouble. I've never understood that. But that aside, I asked a guy once. I said, you know, if you guys don't want people to use the N-word, then why are you using it? And man, the guy, I really thought he was going to take my head off. I was just asking a question. So the reality, though, is if you mention the name Christ to someone who's Jewish, and that's actually the reason I said, I have been hit once by my mother when they found out I was a Christian. and she found out that I was baptized. She got upset. She got so upset she slapped me. A couple of years ago, my dad actually had hit me because he always uses Jesus Christ's name as foul language, and I found it really offensive. And one day I got up the nerve, and yes, even at 46, it took me a long time to get up the nerve to try to correct my dad, or So don't feel bad if you guys are like have that feeling at your age. It doesn't go away if you have honor and respect for your parents. But I said, hey, Dad, I want to talk to you. And I tried talking to him, and I said, when you use the name Jesus Christ as foul language, it really offends me. And he got up and got so angry that he ended up hitting me. And that's it. I've never been hit by anyone else. I've actually been protected by professing atheists. Okay, I'll share that a little bit later. But what ended up happening though is that to a Jewish person they can really be upset by that. And I from that background wanted to find a way to explain the gospel to people, but see, I didn't grow up in a church, so I didn't use all the Christian language. Like I had a friend of mine, and I don't suggest you guys do this. It's really not wise, but a friend of mine was trying to share the gospel, and we were going door to door, and he knocks on this lady's door, and the lady's like, hi, and he's like, hi, we're here, we want to talk to you about spiritual things, and she's like, oh, really, what do you want to talk about? He's like, well, we want to talk about the fact that you're a sinner, and you need to get saved. And that was a kind of his way of, he'd just be like, you're going to hell, and we're here to tell you how to get saved. That's literally how he worded it. And she's like, well, all right, how would I do that? That was her question. I think she didn't know what to ask. And he goes, you need to be washed in the blood of Jesus Christ. And her reaction, she goes, ew! Because she never grew up in church. She doesn't know what she's like, washed in blood? She went, ew! And slammed the door on him. Okay? Not a great way to start a conversation. I mean, I'm just picturing him like, dude, do you have any idea what she's thinking right now? She's thinking you have like, you got a bucket of blood back in the car and you want to douse her with it or something, like, right? You got to drop the Christian language. I mean, as Christians, we may know what that means, but I want to use language they understand, and quite frankly, we live in a culture that doesn't understand Christian language anymore, and the words they do know, they use incorrectly. Okay? And so I want to give you a series of questions that you can ask that keep you from being judgmental, but use God's law. All right? So here's the first question I can walk up to almost anyone, anywhere, and ask them. I can walk up to a complete stranger and say, hey, look, I'm taking a poll. If I have a couple minutes of your time, I'm curious if you're good enough to go to heaven. Or do you consider yourself to be a good person? Either way, if I say, do you consider yourself to be a good person, do you know that 90% of the people say yes to that? 9% will tell me they're an awesome person. And only 1% are honest. Okay? Why? Because we all think we're good. Every person you talk to, if you ask them whether they're a good person, who do you think they're comparing themselves to? Give me some names. Who do they compare themselves to?
They're friends.
Their friends? Did someone say Hitler? That's the most common answer.
Oh, wow.
Do you know who Hitler compared himself to? Stalin.
Huh.
Hitler argued that he really wasn't as bad as Stalin because Stalin killed much more than he did. So he actually thought he wasn't so bad. Stalin was worse. I mean, and Stalin probably compared himself to someone else. We can always find someone that we think is worse than us. And you know what? Everyone thinks they're good and they love to tell you about it. And so I did this in the mall. I used to set up in the mall with a table with free Bibles and tracts, and I had a guy at the mall. He told me he was an awesome person. I said, well, hey, I have a series of questions. I'd like to test it. Can I ask you a couple of questions? And they're usually like, yep, go ahead. I want to show you my goodness. And so I say, have you ever told a lie? Now, I want you to notice all these are questions. All right? They'll say yes. Now I ask them another question. I ask them the question of what does that make you? Because what do I want to do? I want to make the law of God be personal to them, right? Now if I ask them that, what do you think they say? If they admit to lying, what does that make them?
A liar.
Someone said liar, but that's not the answer they usually give. What do you think they say?
Sinner.
A sinner? That's the number 3 answer?
Oh man, a bad person.
Bad person? That is the number 2 answer.
Terrible person.
No. Human. The number 1 answer you get is I'm human. Now I do something right there because I'm trying to show you how I bring these 3 principles together. I want to ask questions. I want to use humor. So what I do is I ask them this. If I was to lie to you, what would you call me? What do you think they say then?
A bad person.
No, they say liar like all the time.
Oh.
And so what I do is I use that to show something. I want to prove a point. I say, you know, it's amazing that you're really quick to be able to spot that I'm a liar, but you find it hard to call yourself one. Do you know why that is? And they usually don't have an answer. And the reason is, and that allows me to explain the reason is we justify what we do so that things that we can see others do something wrong, but when we do something wrong, we want to make it look like, hey, we're just like everybody else. Right? I mean, that's why they say they're a good person. So I ask them if they're a liar. And they'll say, yes, I'm a liar. I say, okay. Have you ever, stolen anything, regardless of value, regardless how long ago? Now, if they're about your age and they say no, ask to see their iPod. Ask if they have any music they illegally downloaded off the internet. Now, I was once in the mall and I asked these 3 kids, I said, have you ever stolen anything? And they just looked at me with these big bulging eyes and they were all afraid and they're like, and they ran away. I didn't quite ever really realize why, but when I turned around I noticed there were 2 security guards behind me. And they were trying to tell me I was standing in a place I wasn't allowed to stand, but I was like, you're telling me that I shouldn't stand here, but I think those guys probably had a really guilty conscience about something when I asked the question, did you ever steal? And you're worried about where I'm standing. Okay, I'll move. Think you should be focusing on something more important here, Mr. Security Officer. But I'll ask them if they've ever stolen anything, and I'll say, what does that make you? Now, what do you think they say most often?
Human?
No.
Darn.
Good try, though. Because lie, to give you a hint, lie, liar, steal,
Stealer.
stealer. They usually say it makes them a stealer. Now I want to use humor, and I just say that's a team in Pittsburgh. Right? We're not Steelers. We're what?
Thieves.
Thieves. And I say, so what does that make you? And they say, a thief. I say, no, a lying thief. I want them to feel that conviction, but it's not me trying to play Holy Spirit with it, but they're usually like, yeah, a lying thief. I'll say, have you ever murdered anybody? They usually say no, but remember that guy I told you, he said he was an awesome person?
Oh, man.
He said yes.
Wow.
I got a little nervous. I said, are you in the military or a police officer? And he says they weren't legal killings. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but I heard a plural there. I went, killings? And he went, yeah. I said, well, like how many are we talking? He's like, a lot. Now, I'm getting a little nervous here.
What?
One feeling convicted. So what I did is I want to lighten this conversation. a little bit. I was still there. And I said, hey, can I go back to that very first question I asked you? I asked you if you're a good person. Do you remember your answer? And he said, yeah. I said, you said you were an awesome person, and yet you've admitted to doing multiple murders. And all of a sudden he looked at me and went, maybe I'm not as good as I think. That is what you want to get someone to. And notice, I'm not judging them anywhere along this, am I? I'm just asking a series of questions, letting them know what God's law is. And what I will do is, if someone says they haven't murdered anybody, anyone know what verse I'm going to turn to prove that they actually are a murderer? Anyone have a guess?
No, but it's something about having the thought of it.
You're exactly right. In Matthew chapter 5, it says that if you call your brother Raka, if you're angry at your brother, you're guilty of the judgment of murder. If you look at a woman with lust, you're going to be guilty of adultery. And so what I'll do is, the reason I go to this one is because I want to show them something. I'll say, have you ever been angry with somebody? And they'll say yes. And I usually do this all the time. Again, I want to lighten the conversation as I'm asking questions. I'll say, I hope not me right now. And they're usually like, no, not you, not you. You know, I have had where I've talking to a couple and the woman goes, him, you know. Okay. I think we're going to switch to marriage counseling now. No. But I'm going to ask them that, and I'm going to say, what I'm actually doing is I'm giving you the 10 Commandments. I don't know if you recognize that. Thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder. And you think you're pretty good on the last one, don't you? And they'll say, yeah. I say, well, God judges our heart, not just our actions. And what I want to do is I want to show them God's standard is much higher than ours. And God judges what we think, what we feel, and what we do. Most people think they're a good person and God's going to judge their heart. And I say, you know what? That's the real problem. God does know our heart, and that's why we're in a real bad predicament. Because if we're even angry with someone, He considers that murder of the heart. And so I say, by what you've shared with me, and here you're going to notice it's a question, but it's a question that's kind of teaching as well. And this maybe you guys don't realize, but statistics show that 1.92 people die every second. That's about 160,000 people a day. Okay? So I'll tell them that if you are one of the 160,000 people that are going to die today, and the reason I use that number is because it shows the gravity of it, how many people are entering into eternity every day. I just came today from a funeral of a schoolmate of my son's, a 19-year-old boy who was seemingly in fine health, riding his bike and running just last week, and within 2 days was dead. And so I'll point that out. If I speak to people, I'm like, especially if I speak to young people like yourselves, I'll ask, do you know anyone your age that's ever died? Because most people think, well, I'll die when I'm 80. But if you're one of the 160,000 people that are going to die today, and God was to judge you by the 10 Commandments, you've admitted to being a lying, thieving, murderer at heart. Now here's the question. Would you be innocent or guilty? That's a tough question to ask someone, but notice, did I judge them anywhere through that? Nope. I just asked a series of questions. I gave them God's standard. I said, look, I'm guilty of the same standard. I'm guilty of all 10 of the 10 Commandments. I'm guilty probably maybe far more than you, but are you guilty? And they'll say yes. Now there's two questions I ask that I always tell people to look at the eyes, and you will see when someone's countenance changes, when they suddenly get really serious. This is the first question I ask where that changes. I ask them, if you're guilty, would you deserve heaven or hell? And sometimes you get people that suddenly they get real silent, because some people say heaven, and now you realize they don't understand the gravity of their sin, right? But some people understand, and they went, I would deserve hell. And they get real serious. Now, sometimes they don't get serious on that question. There's a second question I ask where they get real serious. I was once sharing it at a mall here in New Jersey, and I had a woman, and there's not many women I have to look up to, but she was one that I kind of had to look up to. She was about 2 inches taller than me. That was sort of like a joke, but clearly you didn't get it.
Oh.
I looked up to her. Yeah, okay. We won't. We'll move on. Like you all look up to Mr. Kirby there. Even I look up to him. But some of you got that now. All right. So.
I'm like,
So this, I asked this woman. I said, "Would you deserve heaven or hell?" Now, when we first started this conversation, she was all jokes and giggles and making fun and having a fun time. When I asked her would she deserve heaven or hell, she was like, "You know what? I would deserve hell." And I said to her, I just asked her this question. I said, "Does it concern you that if you were to die today and face God, He would cast you into an eternal lake of fire?" And all of a sudden, she got really serious, and she went silent for literally what felt like a really long time, but probably 30 to 45 seconds. And if you've ever been with where you're waiting for someone to answer that feels like a really long time, and suddenly she looked at me and she said, "I think you just ruined my weekend."
Oh.
I'm like, "Okay, what do you mean?" She goes, "I'm at the mall because I was supposed to, go have dinner with friends. And then we were going to go out and partying and get drunk all weekend long. I can't do that after this conversation." She says, "You know what? I think I need to go home, and I need to do something because I could die today, and I'm not ready to face God." Of course, I then explained you could die on the way home. You don't have to be home to. I said you can get right with God right now. But you see, what I did in that is ask a series of questions. And what I did is I let the law of God do what it did. Now, if someone asks you about evolution, I don't have to answer that. You know why? I could say this. They could ask all these really difficult questions with really big words, and I can say, "Okay, help me understand something. How does that help you on Judgment Day?" Right? I can bypass all that intellectual argument and get right to when they face God. And if people say that I'm being judgmental or anything else, what I'm doing is I'm saying, no, I'm out here loving you. I care enough about you to tell you this. I mean, that seems caring, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you can ask them that. And that's why I get so many professing atheists that will tell me. I've actually had atheists. I had a guy. I told you I'd tell you a story. So I had a guy in New York. I was outside of New York University, NYU, in Washington Square Park. I had one of the biology professors who is a Buddhist, and he was dialoguing with me. Okay, he was yelling at me. And I was being really, really polite to him. And what happened was the guy walked off. He shouted something, walked off, and I said, "Sir, don't just make a claim and run off. Please stand on your convictions and explain what you just said." And he turns around, walks right into my face, and flips me the bird. You guys know what that is?
yeah.
Okay, so I don't have to explain that. So that's what he does. And all of a sudden, this guy that we just called Cowboy Dude, shirtless guy that was seriously buff. I mean, clearly he's been working out. Much bigger than me, and like this, with a cowboy hat on. And literally, he walks right in front of me, and just gets right in this guy's face. And this guy goes, "Hey, I don't have a problem with you, buddy," and pokes him in the chest. And this guy just goes, "Touch me again, you are gonna have a problem," and just literally just starts marching this guy right out of the crowd. I mean, I thought a fight was going to break out. And I'm looking around, and there's like 200 people surrounding me, watching all this. And my friend looks, and he goes, "Preach the gospel! Preach the gospel!" Because I'm just watching like a fight get ready to break out. So I start preaching. Later, I saw Cowboy Dude. And I asked him, I said, "Sir, can I ask you a question? Like, why do you do that?" And he goes, "I fought for your freedom to share what you believe. I totally don't believe what you believe, but you were being so polite, and that guy was being so rude. You were listening to people. You were trying to answer questions. You were being very polite. that guy was being really rude, and it offended me because you have the right to do what you want. He had no right to do what he did. And if you notice there, this is why we call it ambassador evangelism. What I want to challenge you guys to do is not just go out on the street and share the gospel with your mouth, which you must do. You either have to share it in form of a gospel track, which has words to it, or by speaking it. You can't just live and people are going to suddenly ask you, oh, hey, are you a Christian? It doesn't work that way. But you have to share it. But you also must carry yourself, conduct yourself as an ambassador of Jesus Christ. If you're a Christian, this is 2 Corinthians chapter 5. If you're a Christian, the Almighty God of the universe has called you to be His ambassador, for you to have a very special ministry. He wants you to go out into the world and declare a message of reconciliation. That's why you're here. And so when you go out into the park, think of the high calling that God has called you to. And you're going to need to think about that to overcome your fear, because their need has to be greater than your fear. And if you can think of the high calling that God, the Almighty One that created the universe, has called you to, then you can overcome that fear. And that's going to be the first thing you got to learn, is to overcome that fear. So I'm trying to give you guys a couple tactics, a couple ways of learning how to overcome those things. All right? But it's going to take practice. And you're going to blow it. I promise you. But learn from your mistakes and carry on. Does that sound fair?
Yes.
All right? Any questions?
That one.
So the one advantage we have being from Grant County and from Crittenden, a small town here in Kentucky, is we get the chance. We're going to the park this Tuesday night and going to the park, and I'm trying to go there every other week. But we're probably going to see a lot of the same faces every other week, and especially for the students here, they're going to see their classmates at school. So where do you take it to the next step for people that you see often, and what advice do you have for them on the relationship side of things too?
Yeah. So I was a software engineer for years at AT&T Bell Laboratories, and I was in the mall once sharing the gospel, and I had a coworker who I would see at work all the time. I wasn't really friendly with him. We would see each other daily. All of a sudden, he's like, "Hey, what are you doing here at the mall?" So I'm now sharing the gospel with my Muslim coworker, which I didn't really have a chance to do at work because we didn't work close enough where I got to talk with him. Now we have that relationship. Now every time we speak, you know what we speak on? Well, we pretty much speak on the gospel because we talk about that. But you don't have to have every conversation be about the gospel either, because that gets annoying, doesn't it? You ever have someone that they just want to talk to you about one thing? Okay, like parents. Sometimes we do that with our kids. You can ask my kids. You know, you get tired of hearing the same thing over and over. So you want to be careful. You want to make sure that you have the relationship should be able to guide the conversation some. All right? The better the relationship, the more you're going to have time to continue the conversation. And you could even just, if you share the gospel once, you don't have to keep bringing it up. You could just do other things that you guys enjoy doing together. You enjoy skateboarding, go skateboard together and do that. You don't have to bring the gospel up. And maybe at some point you go, hey, we talked a couple months ago. Did you give that any more thought? They may say no. They may not even remember. Okay? But what you want to do is you don't want it to be that your relationship is just about, hey, look, you need to get right with Christ. Because they're going to think that the only reason you like them is that they become a Christian. So there needs to be a balance. But at the same time, what a lot of people try to do is they say, well, I got to be friends with somebody before I can share the gospel with them. If you do it by asking questions, you can let the conversation kind of go anywhere you want it to go. And you're just talking, hey, what do you think? I'm just curious what you think. I mean, you know that I'm a Christian, and I'm curious what you believe. That's a real good way to do it with classmates. And I'm going to tell you guys something. You have a greater advantage to sharing the gospel than anyone my age, and you probably don't realize it. I'm going to give you a couple reasons why. One, most of your life outside of schoolwork is all social, right? Most of you have the responsibility at school, but even at school, you're spending a lot of time socializing. You hang out on, well, okay, you guys probably don't call people on the phones anymore. You text one another, right? Or Facebook one another. Facebook's old school now, right? So that's the thing. You guys are socializing all the time, and you're also getting to an age where people start to question what they were grown up thinking. And so what I would say is it gives you guys an opportunity to give answers to the questions that they may have but never thought about. So try to find a good balance there would be my question, my answer to that question.
We have time for one more question.
Done.
All right. We'll go ahead and call it then since it's 7:05. Now, we really, really appreciate you doing this. I mean, I've gotten so many tools out of it, and we have watched Ray Comfort before, but never really been taught. You know, we've watched, but there's a big difference. So the fact that you would spend time with us today means a lot, and we know you have a busy schedule. So thank you so much from Crittenden Baptist Church.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'll tell you this: if you guys want, you can. If you want to see some of these principles put into practice, go search. You'll see there's a video called "Open Air Preaching with a Demon-Possessed Heckler." You'll see me in New York City with a guy named Will, and you'll see how I use his name. I use the funny things that he says to kind of control the conversation, keep it lighthearted, but at the same time, I communicate the gospel. But yeah, it's something that the only thing I could say to you guys is practice, practice, practice. You will get nervous, but the only way we overcome that is by keep practicing. All right? And I'm going to challenge you guys, when you guys go out to that park, just think about God, because He's the one you're doing this for. You're not doing it to get members in your church. You're not doing it to get the attaboys and the pats on your back from your friends. You're not doing it so that you can silence some, like make some professing atheist sound like he doesn't have answers. You're doing it to present Jesus Christ. All right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I thank you guys for giving me an hour of your time and letting me share this with you. There's a lot more that we could teach, but I wanted to just give you those quick 3 principles. It would be my quick shot in 1 hour what to give to you guys. All right, and I'm looking forward to hearing back, and I'll hear it through Mr. Kirby, how you guys are doing. We're going to keep in touch. I'm excited to hear stories about when you guys go out onto the streets. I want to hear how you guys are doing. All right?
All right.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
All right. You want to close in a word of prayer, Carl, or you want me to? Or?
You take your time.
Sure.
Or with you. All right, you got it.
All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for these young men and women who are brothers and sisters in Christ. We lift these young people up to you, Lord, the next generation that are going to pick up your word that you've hid in their hearts and carry it to a lost and dying generation. And we know that their generation is going to be more difficult, more intolerant of your word than my generation was. And we ask, Lord, that you would give them a boldness and a strength to go out and declare the good news. Give them the right words at the right time. Help them to never stop learning. Help them to see that this is an ever-growing process, that we learn one bit at a time. And I just ask that you bless them, enrich their lives, that they spend a Sunday evening coming to church to learn more about you. We thank you for what you'll do in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.